Have you ever looked at your bank account and thought, I'm smart, I work hard, so why doesn't my financial situation reflect that? Here's the truth that most people never hear. Financial success has almost nothing to do with raw intelligence. It has everything to do with your money habits, the ones you've built over years without even realizing it. And here's the good news. Understanding those habits and changing them is far more achievable than you might think. In this video, we're going to walk through 18 powerful lessons drawn from one of the most important financial books of our time, Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. By the time we're done, you'll understand how to sidestep the most common money traps, how to measure your financial progress in a way that actually makes sense, and how to build the kind of independence that most people only dream about. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it. Lesson 1: No one is crazy. Chapter 1 of The Psychology of Money opens with a statement that stops most readers dead in their tracks. No one is crazy. Money is one of the most powerful forces shaping human life, and yet our relationship with it is almost never rational. Housel's central argument here is that every person carries a completely unique set of experiences, beliefs, and emotional associations when it comes to money, and that those differences don't make anyone stupid or irrational. They make us human. Think about that for a moment. The way you think about money was shaped by where you grew up, what your parents did or didn't have, what you witnessed during financial crises, and dozens of other experiences that no book could fully capture. And the same is true for everyone around you. But here's where it gets uncomfortable, and stay with me here, because this matters. Imagine someone who wins the lottery. Overnight, they go from ordinary to extraordinary. They buy expensive cars, luxury homes, designer clothes, lavish vacations. They give money to friends, to family, to charities. From the outside, it looks like the dream. They feel successful. They feel secure. They believe that money has finally given them everything they ever wanted. And then, without warning, it all collapses. A bad investment. A lawsuit. A divorce. The IRS knocking on the door for unpaid taxes. Friends and family who disappear the moment the money dries up. And suddenly this person is left with no savings, no clear skills, no direction, and a crushing sense of shame and confusion. How does someone recover from that? How do they even begin to explain what happened? Most people in that situation spiral. They blame the world for being unfair. They blame the people around them for being disloyal. They blame themselves for being foolish. Some fall into addiction. Some into hopelessness. But Housel offers a different way of looking at it entirely. What if that person's view of money wasn't crazy, just different? What if their beliefs about what money could buy, security, status, love, were shaped by experiences that made those beliefs feel completely logical at the time? This is the first and perhaps most important lesson of the book. When we stop judging other people's financial choices as irrational and start recognizing them as products of deeply personal experience, we become more open, more empathetic, and, crucially, more capable of learning from perspectives that are different from our own. Because recognizing that no one is crazy is not about excusing poor decisions. It's about understanding them well enough to do better. Lesson 2: How luck and risk shape every financial story. Now, let's talk about something that almost nobody wants to admit, especially successful people. Luck and risk are two sides of the same coin. And according to Housel, they play a far bigger role in financial outcomes than most of us are willing to acknowledge. To illustrate this, Housel points to one of the most famous success stories in modern history, Bill Gates. And here's the question he asks: what if Gates had simply been born in a different place? Gates attended Lakeside School in Seattle, a private institution that, remarkably, had access to a computer terminal at a time when most universities didn't. Gates and his future partner Paul Allen spent hours in that computer lab, teaching themselves to program, building skills that virtually no other teenagers in the world had the opportunity to develop. That access, that single stroke of luck, gave them an edge that would eventually become Microsoft. But here's the part of the story that rarely gets told. While Gates was lucky in his early access to technology, risk hit his partner differently. In 1982, Paul Allen was diagnosed with cancer and was forced to leave Microsoft. The partnership that had built one of the most powerful companies in the world was severed not by a business decision, but by biology, by a random, brutal twist of fate. And their personalities created their own forms of luck and risk too. Gates was ambitious, aggressive, willing to take enormous risks to dominate the software market. Allen was more measured, more curious about life beyond business, more cautious with his investments. Those personality differences eventually drove them apart personally, even as their work together had already changed the world. Gates became one of the wealthiest people in human history, but faced years of legal battles and public criticism over his business tactics. Allen recovered from cancer, built his own fortune, but struggled with addiction and a loneliness that money couldn't fix. Two men. One shared beginning. Completely different outcomes, shaped as much by luck and risk as by talent and effort. So the next time you look at a successful person and assume they simply worked harder or thought smarter than everyone else, pause. Ask what role chance played. And the next time you look at someone who struggled financially, ask the same question. Because if you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, drop the word video in the comments below. It tells me you want more and I'll keep making them. Lesson 3. The dangerous illusion of never enough. Here's a question that might make you uncomfortable. How much money would it actually take for you to feel financially satisfied? Most people give a number. And then, when they reach it, they quietly revise it upward. This is what Housel calls the trap of never enough, and it has destroyed people with far more wealth than most of us will ever see. Take John D. Rockefeller. By any conceivable measure, he was the wealthiest human being in recorded history, with a fortune estimated at over $300 billion in today's terms. He was also a committed philanthropist, donating enormous sums to education, medicine, and social causes. And yet, he could not stop. He once declared he would retire when he reached $100 million. When he got there, the target became $1 billion. And even as his wealth grew beyond anything anyone had previously imagined, he suffered from chronic anxiety, depression, and deteriorating physical health. The accumulation never brought peace. Now consider Rajat Gupta, a man who had built something genuinely remarkable. A senior executive at McKinsey, a net worth exceeding $100 million, a reputation that commanded global respect, and a record of meaningful humanitarian work. By almost any standard, he had more than enough. But he wanted to belong to a different category entirely. He wanted to stand among the billionaires. That desire led him into a friendship with hedge fund manager Raj Rajaratnam, a man operating deep inside the world of insider trading. Gupta began leaking confidential corporate information in exchange for access to Rajaratnam's investment opportunities. The scheme unraveled. Gupta was convicted of fraud, sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, and watched his reputation and fortune collapse in real time. $100 million. And it wasn't enough. So what does enough actually mean? Housel's answer is striking. Enough is not a number. It's a mindset. It's the ability to draw a line between what you genuinely need and enjoy and what you're pursuing only because someone else has it. Rockefeller and Gupta both lost sight of that line. They let comparison and ego rewrite the terms of their satisfaction and paid enormous prices for it. The lesson here is not that ambition is dangerous. It's that ambition without a clear sense of enough has no natural stopping point. And without that stopping point, you will always be running towards something you will never actually reach. Lesson 4. The magic of compounding and why most people miss it. Stay with me on this one, because what you're about to hear completely changed the way I think about long-term money. Warren Buffett is one of the wealthiest people alive. His investing record is legendary. And yet, here is a fact that almost never gets discussed. The vast majority of Warren Buffett's fortune was accumulated after his 50th birthday. Think about that carefully. He didn't become extraordinarily wealthy because he found some secret investment nobody else knew about. He became extraordinarily wealthy because he started early, stayed consistent, and gave compounding the one thing it needs above everything else: time. Compounding is the process of earning returns not just on your original investment, but on every previous return as well. It starts slowly, almost imperceptibly. But over decades, it becomes something that looks almost supernatural. Buffett himself described his financial life as a snowball rolling downhill. The longer it rolls, the bigger it gets, not because of any dramatic acceleration, but simply because the mass keeps growing. Here's why this matters for you right now. If you begin setting aside even a modest amount each month, starting today, investing in a diversified portfolio, and doing nothing more dramatic than simply not stopping, the mathematics of compounding will do things for your future self that seem almost impossible from where you're standing. But here's the catch, and it's a serious one. Compounding works both ways. If you delay saving, if you spend beyond your income, if you carry high-interest debt month after month, compounding turns against you with exactly the same relentless force. The same snowball that can build your wealth can bury you in obligations that grow faster than you can outrun them. Patience and consistency are not glamorous virtues. They don't make for exciting headlines. But according to Housel, they are the most powerful financial forces available to ordinary people. Not timing the market. Not finding the next hot stock. Just starting, staying, and letting time do what only time can do. Lesson 5. Getting wealthy versus staying wealthy, and why they require completely different skills. Have you ever heard of a lottery winner who ended up broke within a few years? Or someone who inherited a substantial fortune and watched it disappear through a combination of poor decisions and bad luck? Or a successful entrepreneur who built a remarkable company, only to lose everything in a single catastrophic deal? These stories are more common than most people realize, and they reveal something crucial that Housel identifies in this chapter. Getting wealthy and staying wealthy are not the same skill. In fact, they often require almost opposite qualities. Getting wealthy typically demands risk-taking, optimism, a willingness to bet on uncertain outcomes and absorb losses along the way. The people who build significant wealth from scratch tend to be bold, visionary, and comfortable with volatility. But staying wealthy? That demands something else entirely: frugality, caution, and what Housel describes as a healthy dose of paranoia. Not the crippling, irrational kind, but the disciplined awareness that what you have can be taken from you, and that protecting it requires a completely different approach than acquiring it. On the other side of the ledger, think about someone who built wealth quietly and kept it, who saved and invested methodically over decades, who lived below their means even as their net worth grew, who measured success not by what they displayed but by what they retained. These people don't make the news. Their stories aren't retold at dinner parties. But they sleep well. And they're still financially stable when the people who were chasing them down have already burned through what they made. The hard truth is that most of us need both sets of skills, but we need to know when to use each one. The boldness that helps you build something significant can destroy you if you apply it to the task of preservation. And the caution that protects what you have can paralyze you if you apply it to every opportunity that comes your way. Lesson 6. Tails you in. Here's something the financial industry almost never says out loud: you don't have to be right most of the time to be financially successful. Housel calls these tail events rare, unexpected occurrences that carry such disproportionate impact that they reshape everything around them in an instant. And the point he makes is both counterintuitive and liberating. Financial outcomes don't follow a neat, balanced distribution. They follow what mathematicians call a power law, where a tiny number of events produce the overwhelming majority of results. Consider Walt Disney. The man who eventually built one of the most valuable entertainment empires in human history spent years failing, going bankrupt, losing rights to characters he had created. What ultimately made Disney's fortune wasn't a long, steady accumulation of moderate successes. It was a handful of breakthrough moments, tail events, that changed the trajectory of everything. The implication for how we think about money is significant. If you're an investor who is right 6 times out of 10 but wrong on the other 4, you might still dramatically underperform someone who is right only twice out of 10 if those 2 times were tail events. The size and timing of your wins matters far more than the frequency. This doesn't mean you should be reckless. It means you should be humble. It means you should stay in the game long enough for tail events to work in your favor. It means you should resist the urge to overreact every time something doesn't go as expected, because the rare moments that do go right can more than compensate for everything that went wrong along the way. Lesson 7: Freedom, the real definition of financial success. Morgan Housel tells a story in this chapter that is deeply personal and one that I think many of you will recognize in your own life. He describes how, as a young man, he became captivated by the world of professional investing. The wealthy investors he admired seemed to have it all: sharp minds, significant power, and extraordinary returns on their portfolios. He studied finance, earned his degree, and landed a position at a prestigious investment firm. And on his very first day, the illusion shattered. The reality of professional investing, he discovered, looked nothing like the image he had constructed. The analysts who earned those outsized salaries woke before dawn, spent their days buried in financial reports and market data, made high-stakes decisions under relentless pressure, managed difficult clients and demanding superiors, and returned home. If they returned home at all, long after most of the city had gone to sleep. They had surrendered their health, their relationships, and their personal time for the sake of compensation. And many of them, Housel observed, were not happy people. He felt trapped. He had signed a contract. He had debts. And he had traded a dream for something he didn't recognize. But then something shifted. He began reading, not just about investing, but about psychology, about happiness, about what actually gives a human life meaning. He started writing, sharing what he was learning with a small audience online. And he discovered something that no finance textbook had ever taught him. He loved writing far more than he had ever loved analyzing spreadsheets. Eventually, he made the leap. He left the firm, built a career as a writer and thinker, earned less money, and became genuinely, sustainably happy. The lesson he draws from this experience is one of the most powerful in the entire book. Housel writes that the highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and decide, freely, what you will do with your day, who you will spend it with, and how long you will keep doing it. Not the size of your portfolio. Not the value of your real estate holdings. Not the brand of your watch. Control over your own time. So I'll ask you directly, does how you earn money right now give you that? And if not, what would it take to get there? Lesson 8: The Man in the Car Paradox. Here is one of the most quietly devastating observations in this entire book, and once you hear it, you'll never look at a luxury car the same way again. Housel points out something simple but profound. When most people see someone driving an expensive, high-status vehicle, they don't actually think about the person driving it. They imagine themselves behind the wheel. They picture how they would feel, how they would look, what others would think of them if the car were theirs. The driver, the actual human being spending their money and managing the consequences, barely registers. To bring this to life, consider Tom. Tom had spent years working hard as a lawyer, driven in large part by a specific dream, to own a Ferrari. He saved, he sacrificed, and eventually he bought one. He was convinced that the car would signal his success, command respect from peers and clients, and deliver the social status he had worked toward for so long. What actually happened was far less glamorous. Most people on the road didn't notice him at all. Those who did were more likely to assume he was showing off than to admire him for his achievement. Some assumed the worst about how he'd made his money. And meanwhile, Tom was quietly drowning in the ongoing costs: insurance, maintenance, storage, the constant anxiety of every parking lot and narrow street. Worse, the satisfaction faded faster than he had expected. The thrill of the first drive gave way to routine. He started noticing other cars, wondering if there was a model more exclusive, more powerful, more impressive. The Ferrari had become ordinary the moment it became his. Tom eventually sold it. He bought something practical. And he made himself a promise to stop measuring his progress against other people's possessions. The paradox Housel identifies is this: we spend money on visible status symbols in order to earn admiration from others, but others aren't admiring us. They're imagining themselves. The audience we're performing for was never really watching. Lesson 9: Wealth is what you don't see. We live in a culture that has become extraordinarily skilled at displaying the appearance of wealth. Social media amplifies this relentlessly. The curated images, the aspirational lifestyles, the carefully staged moments of luxury and leisure that certain celebrities, influencers, and public figures broadcast to millions of followers every day. And for many people, these images land as evidence. Evidence that those people are wealthy. Evidence that their lives are full and satisfying. Evidence that money, spent visibly, leads to happiness. But here's what the camera never shows. It doesn't show the debt behind the designer wardrobe. It doesn't show the anxiety behind the smile posted from a rented villa. It doesn't show the loans taken out to fund vacations, the credit card balances quietly compounding in the background, the financial fragility hiding beneath a very polished surface. Housel draws a distinction that is both simple and clarifying. Being rich and being wealthy are not the same thing. Rich is income. It's what comes in. Wealth is what stays. It's the assets that accumulate when you consistently spend less than you earn. And wealth, almost by definition, is invisible because the moment you convert it into something visible, you've spent it. The person driving the modest car and living in the unremarkable house might be building genuine, substantial, lasting financial security. The person broadcasting their lifestyle to 10,000 followers might be one unexpected expense away from collapse. Housel asks his readers to sit with some uncomfortable questions. What are you spending money on that you don't actually need or enjoy? What are you deferring, experiences, investments, savings, because you're allocating resources to things that make you look successful rather than actually becoming so? And how would your financial decisions change if there were no audience watching? These are not comfortable questions, but they may be the most important ones. Lesson 10. Save money. This might be the most straightforward chapter in the book, but don't let that fool you into underestimating it. Because what Housel argues here cuts directly against how most people think about wealth building. Most people believe that the path to financial security runs through income, that if you earn more, you'll inevitably accumulate more. But Housel makes a different case entirely. The most reliable, most certain, most consistent way to build wealth is simply to spend less than you earn and to keep doing it. Not the performance of your investments. Not your salary. Not your side income. How much you keep. To make this concrete, imagine two people with identical incomes. The first person spends enthusiastically. Clothes, gadgets, experiences, social occasions. She treats herself regularly and genuinely believes that she deserves it. She doesn't save much, partly because there's not much left, and partly because saving feels like deprivation. Her spending is driven, in large part, by the desire to feel a certain way about herself in the eyes of others. The second person budgets carefully. She tracks her income and expenses. She distinguishes between what she wants and what she needs. She saves consistently not because she's miserable or austere, but because financial security is something she genuinely values. Her spending reflects her own priorities, not external expectations. Over 10 years, those two approaches produce dramatically different realities, regardless of what their salaries looked like. Housel's point is not that spending is bad. It's that saving is a reflection of the gap between your ego and your income. The smaller that gap, the less you need external signals of status and success, the more naturally you save. And the more you save, the more options you accumulate. Options to take risks. Options to walk away from situations that don't serve you. Options that compound over time just as powerfully as interest. Lesson 11. You and me. Here's something almost every human being does, even when they know better: compare themselves to people who have more. Not to people who have less. Not to people in different circumstances. To the ones slightly above, or dramatically above on whatever scale feels most relevant at the moment. Housel acknowledges that this comparison instinct is deeply human. It is, in some contexts, a powerful motivator. But in the context of financial decisions, it is almost always destructive because it causes us to measure our success against metrics that were never designed for us and to feel inadequate for failing to match outcomes that had entirely different inputs. The story Housel brings to this chapter is Jim Carrey, one of the most successful comedians and actors of his generation. Carrey grew up in genuine poverty. His family, at one point, lived in a van. He worked obsessively to break through as a stand-up comedian before eventually landing the roles Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, that made him a household name and a multimillionaire. And then, at the height of that success, he said something that stopped people cold. He said he thought everyone should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they could see for themselves that it wasn't the answer. Carrey had achieved everything the comparison game told him to pursue. He had the money, the fame, the recognition. He had beaten the metrics by which most people measure success. And it didn't deliver what he had imagined it would. He eventually turned towards spirituality and art as the primary sources of meaning in his life, not because he rejected success, but because he redefined what success actually meant to him personally. That is the invitation of this chapter. To stop measuring your life against someone else's yardstick. To identify what genuinely matters to you, in terms of health, freedom, relationships, and purpose, and to use those as the benchmarks against which you measure your own progress. Lesson 12, Surprise. Let me ask you something. At the start of 2020, how many people, economists, epidemiologists, investors, government officials, had a detailed plan for what was about to happen? Almost none. Within weeks, a virus that most of the world had barely heard of shut down global supply chains, collapsed financial markets, triggered mass unemployment, and fundamentally disrupted the way billions of people lived, worked, and interacted. Entire industries were devastated overnight. Businesses that had operated for decades closed permanently. Financial plans that had seemed solid turned to dust in a matter of weeks. And yet, within that same period of catastrophic disruption, entirely new opportunities emerged. Vaccine development was accelerated to timelines that had previously seemed impossible. Remote work, once a niche arrangement, became standard for vast portions of the global workforce. E-commerce expanded years ahead of projections. New industries were born. Adaptable businesses thrived even as rigid ones failed. The COVID-19 pandemic is Housel's defining example of what he calls the inevitable surprise, the event that nobody predicted but that, in retrospect, the financial system had no structural protection against. His lesson is not that you should live in fear of such events. It's that you should build your financial life with the explicit assumption that surprises are coming, you simply won't know their shape or timing in advance. Maintain a margin of safety. Keep emergency reserves. Diversify your income sources. Never become so committed to a single financial plan that you cannot adapt when the ground shifts beneath it. Because the ground will shift. It always does. Lesson 13, Leave room for error. This chapter carries a warning that sounds simple, but has derailed countless financial lives. Do not let your investment identity become your personal identity. Housel's argument is this: when we become emotionally fused with a particular investment, a particular strategy, or a particular financial position, we stop making decisions based on reason. We start making them based on ego. And ego is a terrible financial advisor. Imagine you've invested in a company you believe in deeply. You've researched it, you've talked about it, you've told people about it. And then it starts declining. Month after month, the position erodes. What do? If your identity is bound up in that investment, if being right about it has become part of how you see yourself, you will almost certainly hold on too long. Because selling means admitting you were wrong. And admitting you were wrong feels, in that moment, like an attack on your competence and judgment as a person. The rational decision, cut the loss, reallocate the capital, learn from the experience, becomes emotionally inaccessible because it conflicts with how you've defined yourself. Housel's prescription is clear. Set goals. Build a long-term plan. Diversify broadly. And above all, keep a financial cushion that protects you from being forced to make critical decisions during the worst possible moments. Think about how you would feel, honestly, not hypothetically, if a particular investment lost half its value. Would it change your daily life? Would it compromise your security? If the honest answer is yes, then the position is too large, regardless of how confident you feel about its prospects. Build for security and peace of mind, not just for maximum returns. Lesson 14, you will change. Here is a prediction I'm willing to make about you with complete confidence. The person you will be in 20 years will have different values, different priorities, different sources of meaning, and different ideas about what constitutes a good life than the person you are today. This is not a criticism. It's simply what human beings do. We change, not just in our preferences, but in our fundamental understanding of what we want from life. Housel's point in this chapter is that most financial plans fail to account for this reality. We make decisions in our 20s about retirement, about education, about lifestyle, about investment strategy, as if the person making those decisions will remain static indefinitely. And then, when we inevitably change, those plans no longer fit. Think about the decision to go back to school. On the surface, it's a financial question: tuition costs, opportunity costs, projected salary increases. But underneath that, it's a question about identity. About who you want to become, what you want to learn, what kind of work feels meaningful. And the right answer in your 30s may be completely different from the right answer you gave in your 20s, because you are a different person. Housel's invitation here is to hold your financial plans loosely. Not carelessly, but with genuine flexibility. Revisit them regularly. Be willing to revise them when your circumstances or your values shift. Don't stay committed to a strategy just because a previous version of you chose it, or because the people around you are following a similar path. The map that got you here may not be the one that gets you where you actually want to go. Lesson 15: Nothing is free. Every investment comes with a price. And that price is not always paid in money. Housel's argument in this chapter is that the stock market, and investing more broadly, extracts a cost in the form of uncertainty, volatility, and emotional discomfort. The investors who perform best over long periods are not the ones who avoid these costs. They're the ones who understand them clearly enough to absorb them without panicking. Consider buying a house. On the surface, it's one of the most straightforward investments most people will ever make, providing shelter, stability, and, historically, long-term appreciation in value. But the price tag goes far beyond the purchase price. There's the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, the unexpected repairs, the periods when the market declines and the asset is worth less than what you paid for it. None of those costs are reasons not to buy a house. But entering the investment without understanding them, or without the financial resilience to absorb them, is how what should be a sound long-term decision becomes a source of sustained crisis. The same logic applies across every asset class. Stocks go down before they go up. Businesses encounter unexpected headwinds. Real estate markets correct. The price of long-term returns is short-term discomfort, and the investors who can hold through that discomfort, without selling at the bottom out of fear, are the ones who actually collect those long-term returns. Know what you're paying. Not just in dollars, but in stress and uncertainty. And make sure you can actually afford the full cost before you commit. Lesson 16: Reasonable and Rational. The story of Mark Zuckerberg. One of the most liberating ideas in this entire book is this: there is no universal formula for financial success. And the moment you stop trying to find one, you become a much better decision maker. Housel makes a clear distinction in this chapter between what is mathematically optimal and what is personally reasonable. And he argues, convincingly, that the reasonable path, the one that you can actually sustain emotionally and psychologically over decades, is almost always more valuable than the theoretically perfect one. To illustrate this, he points to Mark Zuckerberg, the founder and CEO of Meta, one of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. And Zuckerberg's approach to his own fortune is, by conventional financial wisdom, deeply unconventional. He has not sold any significant portion of his Facebook shares since 2012. From a portfolio diversification standpoint, this is not optimal. Having the vast majority of your net worth concentrated in a single company exposes you to enormous risk. Any traditional financial advisor would counsel against it. And yet, Zuckerberg has committed to giving away 99% of his shares to charitable causes over the course of his lifetime, channeling his resources toward philanthropy and long-term innovation rather than personal consumption. He doesn't spend on luxury goods or status signals. He has, by his own account, structured his financial life around a vision and a value system that are entirely his own. Is this the right approach for you? Almost certainly not. But that's exactly Housel's point. Zuckerberg isn't following the playbook. He's following his own understanding of what he wants his money to do, and he's doing it with complete clarity and consistency. The question this chapter puts to you is, what does your money actually need to accomplish? Not according to conventional wisdom. Not according to what your peers are doing. According to your own honest assessment of what matters to you. Find that answer and build your strategy from there. Lesson 17. The Seduction of Pessimism. Here's something worth sitting with. Pessimism sounds smarter than optimism. Almost always. When someone predicts a market crash, a coming recession, or the inevitable collapse of some major institution, they're taken seriously. Their warnings feel grounded in evidence. Their caution feels responsible. When an optimist makes the opposite case, that things will improve, that human ingenuity will find solutions, that markets will recover, they're often dismissed as naive or insufficiently rigorous. Housel argues that this asymmetry is one of the most costly cognitive traps in personal finance. Consider someone who has built a diversified investment portfolio after careful research. They understand the principles. They've thought through their risk tolerance and time horizon. And then they open the news, and it's one headline after another about imminent economic disaster. That kind of sustained pessimistic noise is genuinely seductive. It feels like information. It feels like wisdom. It can lead a perfectly rational investor to sell off positions at exactly the wrong moment, locking in losses and removing themselves from markets just before a recovery that would have more than compensated for everything that preceded it. The same dynamic applies to entrepreneurship. Starting a business is genuinely risky. The odds of failure are real. But if every aspiring founder spent enough time immersed in the pessimistic case, reading about the failure rates, the competition, the regulatory burdens, the economic uncertainties, most of them would never start at all. And the world would be poorer for it. Housel isn't asking you to be blindly optimistic. He's asking you to be honest. Acknowledge the risks. Understand the downside. Plan for adversity. But don't mistake pessimism for sophistication. The arc of human economic history bends, persistently and demonstrably, toward growth, recovery, and improvement, even through periods of genuine catastrophe. Stay invested. Stay thoughtful. And be careful about letting other people's fear become your policy. Lesson 18. When you'll believe anything. We've come to the final lesson, and it may be the most important one to carry with you after this video ends. Human beings are story-driven creatures. We don't experience the world as raw data. We experience it as narrative. And that means we are vulnerable, in ways we rarely acknowledge, to stories that feel true even when they aren't. Housel's argument in this closing chapter is deceptively simple. The stories we find most compelling are usually the ones that confirm what we already believe. And our financial decisions are shaped far more than we realize by the stories we tell ourselves about how money works, who deserves to be wealthy, what risks are worth taking, and what the future is likely to hold. This is not irrationality exactly. It's human. But it's also expensive. Think about diet culture as an analogy. At any given moment, there is a diet that is spectacularly popular, praised by influencers, promoted by books and podcasts, adopted by millions of people who swear by its results. Some of these diets have legitimate scientific support. Others are built on a compelling narrative, a charismatic advocate, and a carefully curated set of testimonials. The people who adopt them aren't stupid. They're responding to a story that feels true and that aligns with what they want to believe, that this approach is the key they've been looking for. The same phenomenon plays out constantly in financial markets. A compelling narrative about a particular stock, sector, or investment strategy spreads rapidly, and the people absorbing it are often filtering out the evidence that contradicts it without realizing they're doing so. Housel's prescription is not cynicism. It's careful, disciplined curiosity. Question the stories you find most attractive. Actively seek out the evidence that challenges your current views. Be especially skeptical of information sources that are aligned with a financial incentive to tell you exactly what you want to hear. The truth, he argues, is almost always more complex and more interesting than any single narrative can capture. Conclusion. If you've stayed with us through all 18 of these lessons, you already understand something that most people never fully grasp. Money is not primarily a mathematical problem. It is a psychological one. The numbers, the rates, the allocations, the calculations, those can be learned in an afternoon. What takes a lifetime to master is the relationship between your deepest beliefs and fears and the decisions you make with your money every single day. Morgan Housel's book is a rare thing, a guide to financial thinking that takes the human element seriously. It doesn't pretend that we are rational actors maximizing utility. It acknowledges that we are emotional, socially embedded, experience-shaped human beings who are doing our best with imperfect information, unpredictable circumstances, and deeply personal values. The through lines across all 18 lessons are clear. Psychology matters more than mathematics in finance. How you think and feel about money determines how you act, and how you act determines outcomes. Experience and observation are your most powerful teachers. Time is the ultimate financial resource. Saving more and spending less remains the most reliable path to genuine independence. And humility, the willingness to acknowledge what you don't know, to adapt when circumstances change, and to learn from your mistakes, is the quality that separates those who build lasting financial security from those who don't. If you want to go even deeper on the rules of money you need to master in order to build real, lasting wealth, I've put together another video that I think you'll find genuinely valuable. Watch it next. And if this video gave you something to think about, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.